Hello and welcome to the Political Opinions podcast, where every opinion is given equal footing and political tolerance and debate are given their proper attention in a world where both are on the decline. I hope all of you have had a good Christmas and a good New Year, and let's hope that 2021 is a bit better than 2020. But with that being said, let's dive right into the different opinions on whether or not democracy should be spread around the world using force. US presidents such as Bill Clinton are well known for advocating the use of spreading democracy in order to increase what they view as a global peace. There are those, however, who disagree with this approach and argue that democracy should not be forced upon other nations for various reasons. The aim of this episode will not be to try and argue for or against spreading democracy through force, but rather to highlight the different opinions on the topic and provide a comparison between them. But with that being said, I will start with the arguments in favour of spreading democracy through force, followed by the arguments opposed, with a comparison at the end. Firstly, on spreading democracy, the main argument essentially revolves around this global political theory known as the Democratic Peace Thesis, or DPT for short. Essentially, this follows that, for numerous reasons, from economic interdependence to diplomatic ties, and inherent differences in the way democracies and non-democracies approach the issue of war, certain people believe that democracies do not fight each other, and depending on how you look at the evidence, it can be supported or disproved. For proponents of DPT, they believe that by using force to spread democracy, in the long term, it can help create a more peaceful world. They would argue that although there is a short-term cost, for example, a war, it comes at a greater long-term benefit, which is a perpetual global democratic peace. And this extends to some more extreme neoconservatives and neoliberals who believe that only through regime change can the US defeat its enemies, and believe that due to ideological differences between the US's Western liberal capitalist democracy and other states' governments, they believe that by forcing them to be replaced with democracies, they will remove their enemies and improve their global standing. Some people argue in favour of regime change and enforcing democracy based on the idea of it protecting people's rights. Essentially, most of the time, it is the non-democracies which are worse when it comes to human rights, and in most cases, many countries that aren't democratic are involved in suppression and breaches of various human rights. For this reason, some would argue that what they call the free world has a responsibility to intervene in order to protect non-democratic nations from their oppressive regimes. An argument posed in Iraq was that the US was generally seen as the liberator at the beginning, and that if post-Saddam Iraq had been managed properly, the US would have had a successful mission. And as such, the basis essentially that liberating people from oppressive dictators can at least be supported there. Some people also believe that force is the only means by which they can achieve the spread of democracy. They would look to examples like Russia and China, where, using traditional means of promoting democracy, such as incorporating them into economic and political organisations, they have failed to make them more democratic. And if anything, the two states have shifted much further away from democracy, with Putin and Xi Jinping becoming increasingly more powerful autocratic leaders. And as such, the US and some others should, in these people's view, act before these states become too powerful, and therefore, if they're not becoming democratic by other means, should force them to become a democracy. Supporters of forcing democracy also believe in the inherent benefits of a democratic state. Essentially, these people believe that democracy is the best form of government, as it ensures a wide range of ideas and individuals who are accountable to the public. It also ensures better protection of rights for the people, and can lead, in some people's views, to better and more stable economies. Therefore, by spreading democracy through force, it benefits the world, the economy, and the people of every state, who therefore become a democracy, in the long run at least. Then on the idea that you shouldn't spread democracy through force. The first argument opposed to this practice claims that democracy just isn't as good as its proponents make it out to be. Every democracy still has large and apparent flaws, and some would argue that there is proof that they are far from the best system. For example, China points to the slow response the US Congress has made to the coronavirus stimulus bill due to partisan disputes as proof that a one-party state is better. With one party, there is less personal interest, there is less partisan disputes, and therefore the state can respond more quickly and efficiently to different problems. Opponents of the democratic peace thesis would also argue that democracies have fought each other in the past and will continue to do so. Depending on how you look at the evidence, you can either prove or disprove the idea of the democratic peace. And although it is far too complex to go over in this video, there are many different people and many different reasons why people believe that democracies aren't peaceful, and depending on how you look at the evidence, democracies have fought wars. Some people also claim that democracy is merely a Western idea, and that other cultures do not necessarily support it. Proponents of democracy claim that other states who haven't moved to democracy have done so either because the state has resisted it through force, or because they are ignorant to the benefits of democracy. But those on the other side would suggest that not everyone wants a democracy. In some people's view, it is even arrogant to suggest that democracy is simply the best form of governance because you believe it to be so, and as such, spreading it on this basis is wrong and goes against the wishes of the people in these states, which, in their view especially, is the whole idea of a democracy. Some also claim that spreading democracy is used as a guise for ulterior motives such as oil and, in some cases, revenge. Some people have gone so far as to argue that the Second Iraq War occurred for reasons other than those portrayed, and beyond just the apparent lies that Blair and Bush have been accused of. Some believe it was due to obtaining oil for US companies, and others as actually finishing the job of George Bush's father in the First Gulf War. Therefore, spreading democracy through force is dangerous and can be exploited by states for other means. Some may also argue for the benefits of democracy, but oppose the use of force to obtain it. Using force puts people's lives at risk, be it soldiers or civilians, and as such it should be avoided. War is normally needed in these cases to spread democracy, and if you want to spread democracy everywhere, you're going to have a lot of wars, and the short-term cost is simply too great. It's better to these people to promote democracy through other means such as economic prospects and education, and should allow the people of these states to choose their own course rather than being forced into it through a war they most likely didn't want. And extending from this, some believe that forcing a nation into democracy when it isn't ready can be counterproductive. Essentially, this is the viewpoint that a stable dictator is better than a failed state. Take Libya, for example. Following the removal of Colonel Gaddafi, the country has descended into an extreme civil war. Similar cases in Iraq, although it's more stabilised, and this has occurred because these new political parties have had no experience in a democracy. They are not used to compromise, to negotiation, to putting aside differences to try and come to a common agreement, and as such they are not ready, especially in this case, to become a democracy. And instead these people argue democracies should be allowed to occur naturally and over time, and that forcing it upon states who are not ready is counterproductive as a result. Now onto the comparison. On the inherent benefit of a democracy over other forms of government, those in favour believe that democracy is a good thing. They would argue that it promotes peace, negotiation, it benefits the state and the people, it can be good for the economy, and for multiple reasons, therefore, governments should become democratic. While those on the other side would say that democracy isn't always good. It can be inefficient. It can lead to personal interest interfering in the political process. It can, most importantly, lead to partisan problems and corruption. Democracy faces the same problem as every other form of government, and it is not magically better because someone said so. Then, on this belief of is democracy the best form or the West form, essentially, those in favour of democracy would say that democracy is the best form of government. It extends into this kind of end of history viewpoint that every country over time will become a democracy, that a Western liberal democracy is the final form of human political organisation, and as such states should become democratic. However, those who disagree would say that democracy is a Western idea, and that is another example of neo-imperialism, essentially whereby Western ideas are being forced upon other states under the guise that they are best, and that these other systems are, in some cases, uncivilized compared to democracy. On the question of the democratic peace thesis, those in favour of it claim that making democracy more common will promote more peace in the long run. They believe democracies do not go to war, and as such, more democracies should be created. However, those on the other side would argue that the actual benefits of the democratic peace are limited, or that it is simply not true to begin with, and that it is wrong to spread democracy through force on the belief and the hope that it will cause these countries to not go to war with each other. On the issue of short versus long-term benefits, those favouring spreading democracy through force would advocate for the long-term benefits of a global democratic peace, which would outweigh any short-term cost to obtain it. However, those on the other side would point to the fact that short-term costs exist, and that you're doing it to people who may not necessarily want it, and as such, it is another case of foreign interference in states. On the question of using force as a means to promote democracy, those in favour would say that using force is the best means because it prevents states who are slow to respond or who have had negative experiences such as Russia and China with other areas of democracy from being unsuccessful in their transition, and that using force ensures these countries become democratic, which is the ultimate goal to these people. However, those on the other side may either say that you should not use force at all and should not force people to become a democracy, or that you should try and promote democracy, but you shouldn't use force. You should allow countries to do it themselves, and you should use soft power and peaceful means to obtain more democracies. And then on the question of forcing a democracy on a state that isn't ready, those in favour would say that people are often unaware of democracy or unable to change due to the suppressive actions of a state, and as such they should be forced to transition. However, those on the other side would argue that it's arrogant to believe that democracy has to be spread, and is often used as a ploy for other means, and democracies should come naturally and not be forced, because when they are forced, they often collapse quite quickly, and the transition periods can be particularly unstable. Overall, though, those in favour of spreading democracy by force believe in the benefit of democracy, and that force is necessary to spread it around the world to obtain the long-term benefits of democratic peace, while those opposed believe either that democracy is a Western construct and not as good as some say, or believe that force is the wrong means to spread it, and that the cost of war exceeds any benefit for more democracies. Ultimately, though, as the world moves away from neoliberalism that existed in the early 2000s, we will see less and less use of force to spread democracy, especially as states once again begin to look inward to solve the problems caused by coronavirus. What are your thoughts on this episode? Was there anything that I missed, got wrong, or could do better? Let me know in the comments or on Twitter, and be sure to check back on Monday for another episode, and I will be going back to the traditional Monday, Friday, 7 PM GMT episodes. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you all soon.